From New York City, the epicenter of the pandemic, this is Democracy Now!
My sister, she wanted to see her daughter grow up and be there for her and encourage her.
New York and New Jersey, the next highest number of coronavirus infections per capita in the United States is in the Navajo Nation, the largest indigenous reservation in the country. We'll speak with the partner of a woman who died of the virus, 28-year-old Valentina Blackhorse, a beloved community leader who promoted Navajo culture, left behind a daughter named Poet. We'll also get an update from a Navajo doctor in Winslow, Arizona, and go to Gallup, New Mexico, to speak with the head of a contingent of volunteer doctors with the HEAL initiative. Then we go to a prison in Ohio, where one of the worst coronavirus outbreaks in the United States has killed at least 11 prisoners and one staff member. 80% of prisoners and half the prison staff at Marion Correctional Institution have tested positive for COVID-19 in April, making it the largest virus hotspot in the country.
I'm in Marion Correctional, where the coronavirus is just spreading like wildfire. Out of 2,500 people, they say 1,300 people got it. That's a scary thought. I might not make it home to my children, I just wanted to speak up for what I believe in, and hopefully that this will make a difference and it reaches the right hands and, we get some kind of relief. All I can ask is just keep us in your prayers.
We'll speak with the co-founder of Prison Abolition Prisoner Support, whose husband James is incarcerated at Marion, and look at the coronavirus and case for abolition with Professor Ruth Wilson Gilmore, author of Change Everything, Racial Capitalism and the Case for Abolition. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The official coronavirus death toll worldwide has topped 250,000, with over 3.6 million confirmed cases. The official U.S. death toll is expected to top 70,000 today, but that's widely believed to be an undercount. A pair of studies predict the COVID-19 outbreak is set to become far deadlier in the United States. A draft Federal Emergency Management Agency report forecasts daily coronavirus deaths in the United States will rise to 3,000 people a day by June 1st. That's a 70% increase over the current figure. Separately, the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation at the University of Washington estimates the U.S. death toll will reach around 135,000 by August in the United States, more than double the Institute's previous forecast. Despite the worsening outbreak, many states are continuing to lift restrictions this week, including Florida, where Governor Ron DeSantis gave the green light for state parks, non-essential businesses, and restaurants to open across most of the state at reduced capacity. On Monday, Miami Beach had to close a popular park just 5 days after reopening it, after thousands failed to adhere to new rules requiring social distancing and wearing a face mask. In California, Governor Gavin Newsom said Monday some manufacturing and retail businesses, including bookstores, clothing and sporting goods stores, and florists, would be allowed to reopen Friday. Businesses will have to abide by certain rules, including social distancing and offering curbside pickup.
The data says it can happen, but we recognize as we begin to modify, behavior is modified and possible community spread may occur. If that's the case, and we do not have the capacity to control that spread, to trace that spread, to track that spread, to isolate individuals that may have been in contact with COVID-19, we will have to make modifications anew.
China's fighting back on unsubstantiated claims by the Trump administration that the coronavirus was man-made and originated in a lab in Wuhan. Chinese state media has accused Secretary of State Mike Pompeo of outright lying, calling on him to present evidence of his claims. The World Health Organization, U.S. intelligence agencies, and most scientists, including Trump's top coronavirus expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, have said they believe the outbreak started in nature, most likely through animal to human transmission. Reports emerged Monday that further intelligence shared with the Five Eyes Alliance, that's the U.S., Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, indicates it's highly unlikely COVID-19 started inside a laboratory. In New York, a report alleges the Metropolitan Detention Center, MDC, in Brooklyn is destroying prisoners' medical records in an attempt to obscure the real number of people testing positive for the coronavirus and to avoid providing them medical care. The report was written by the former medical director of New York City's jails as part of a class action lawsuit led by prisoners at MDC. This comes as attorneys with the Federal Defenders of New York say MDC staff are blocking quarantined prisoners from speaking to their lawyers during the COVID-19 lockdown. The clothing retailer J.Crew has filed for bankruptcy after the coronavirus pandemic forced the company to close stores across the country. The company expects to stay in business. Student loan holders are suing Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. The Education Department is being accused of continuing to garnish the wages of federal student loan borrowers who fall behind on payments despite a new law prohibiting this during the pandemic. World leaders, wealthy individuals and organizations joined in efforts spearheaded by the European Union Monday to raise $8 billion for the development of a vaccine and treatments for the coronavirus. The European Union and Norway each pledged $1 billion. Canada pledged $850 million. The United States pledged nothing and refused to take part in the fundraising effort. This is European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen.
At a time when we are sitting further apart than usual, the world has shown it is standing closer together than ever before. And in the space of just a few hours, we have collectively pledged 7.4 billion euros for vaccines, diagnostics and treatments. And all this money will help kickstart unprecedented global cooperation.
That's European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The United Nations said the success of the initiative would be measured by the equal distribution of any treatment. In Russia, questions abound after 3 healthcare workers have mysteriously fallen from hospital windows over the past 2 weeks. 2 of them have died while one is hospitalized. The hospitalized doctor previously posted video on social media calling out the lack of medical equipment and the fact that he had to keep working despite testing positive for COVID-19. Russian authorities said they're investigating all 3 cases. Coronavirus cases continue to surge in Russia with over 155,000 confirmed infections and over a reported 1,400 deaths. In Britain, the Office of National Statistics said the nation's death toll has topped 32,000 to become the highest in Europe and second only in the world to the United States, according to that figure. Meanwhile, a French hospital says they treated a COVID-19 patient as early as December, a month before the government confirmed its first cases. Venezuela has announced it's detained 2 former U.S. Special Forces soldiers who took part in a failed armed incursion aimed at toppling the Venezuelan government. On Monday, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro showed U.S. passports for the 2 men, identified as Aaron Berry and Luke Denman. A former Green Beret named Jordan Judreau has acknowledged the men were working for him in an attempt to detain Maduro. On Monday, Maduro accused the U.S. of being behind the plot.
Mike Pompeo was betting on this attack and believed that this attack would end the revolution, end the Constitution, overthrow the government, and kill me. God save us and protect us.
In Colombia, an investigative report alleges Colombian military intelligence officials carried out a massive surveillance operation targeting over 130 people, including politicians, union leaders, and more than 24 Colombian and international journalists, including reporters working at the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. The military reportedly has a database with personal data, including home addresses, phone numbers, and information on family members and colleagues. Press freedom groups are demanding right-wing Colombian President Iván Duque investigate the allegations. Reuters reports the Colombian Defense Ministry on Friday announced the ouster of 11 unnamed military officials and the resignation of a military general linked to the scandal. Sudan has outlawed female genital mutilation. The UN estimates nearly 9 out of 10 women and girls in Sudan have undergone the practice. A recent report estimates female genital mutilation is being regularly practiced in over 90 countries. Women's and children's rights advocates celebrated the move, but warned much work would need to be done to ensure the law is properly implemented. Back in the United States, the Secretary of the U.S. Senate rejected a request from Joe Biden to search for and release any possible records of a complaint by Tara Reade following an alleged sexual assault in 1993. Reade recently publicly accused Joe Biden of the assault, which she says happened when she worked in then-Senator Biden's office. Biden has denied the allegation. Reade said she made complaints about Biden's inappropriate behavior but did not bring up the sexual assault. Reporters have called for Biden's senatorial records at the University of Delaware to be searched, but Biden has refused to make such a request, and the papers are sealed to the public. A top engineer and vice president at Amazon has resigned to protest the company's recent firing of whistleblowers and warehouse workers who demonstrated against unsafe working conditions during the pandemic. Tim Bray described in a blog post what he called a, quote, vein of toxicity running through the company culture. He went on to write, quote, I choose neither to serve nor drink that poison. In Washington state, King County reached a $2.25 million settlement and apologized Monday for the fatal shooting of a black teenage boy by sheriff's deputies in 2017. My Chance Dunlop Gittins was 17 years old when he was killed during a failed sting operation that falsely targeted one of his friends. Labor scholar and Puerto Rican independence activist Jose Soler has died. For over 20 years, he was director of the UMass Dartmouth Labor Education Center and most recently co-head of the New Bedford Coalition to Save Our Schools, which fought charter school expansion. Soler emerged in the social justice world as a leader in the Chicano rights organization, the Brown Berets. He advocated for human rights and the independence of Puerto Rico in the 1970s. Throughout his life, Soler continued to work in the labor rights movement. He was a union organizer with UAW District 65 and a labor journalist. Jose Soler was 75 years old. And the 2020 Pulitzer winners were announced on Monday. Among the recipients, Nicole Hannah-Jones of the New York Times for her essay as part of the 1619 Project, which re-examines the legacy of slavery. Staff of the Baltimore Sun won for local reporting, and the Anchorage Daily News was awarded the Public Service Prize for its series with ProPublica about law enforcement and sexual crimes in Alaska. Brian Rosenthal won for his New York Times expose of the New York's taxi industry crisis and the predatory lending that led to it. Yale professor Greg Grandin won the Pulitzer for nonfiction for his book The End of the Myth, From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America. The book Solitary by Albert Woodfox with Leslie George was a finalist in the same category of general nonfiction. Solitary is a memoir by Albert Woodfox, who served the longest time in solitary confinement of any prisoner in the United States. Ear Hustle, a podcast out of San Quentin State Prison, was a finalist for the first Pulitzer Prize in audio. And Ida B. Wells received a posthumous special citation for, quote, her outstanding and courageous reporting on the horrific and vicious violence against African Americans during the era of lynching. You can see our interviews with many of the winners and finalists of this year's Pulitzer Prize, including Greg Grandin, Albert Woodfox, and Brian Rosenthal at democracynow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman here in the epicenter of the pandemic in New York City. My co-host Juan Gonzalez is in New Jersey, where he joins us from his home in New Brunswick to help stop community spread. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Well, New York has the most documented cases of COVID-19 in the country, followed by New Jersey. But we begin today's show in the place with the third highest number of coronavirus infections in the United States per capita, the Navajo Nation. With a population of some 350,000 and territory that spreads over 27,000 square miles, the Navajo Nation is the largest Native American reservation in the country. The rural community is reported having nearly 2,300 known cases of COVID-19 and 73 deaths as of Sunday. One of those to die from the coronavirus is a 28-year-old woman, Valentina Blackhorse, a beloved community leader who won multiple pageants, promoted Navajo culture and education. She leaves behind a daughter named Poet. Her sister, Vanielle Blackhorse, says Valentina had hoped to enter politics in the future. She spoke to New Mexico's KRQE.
My sister, she wanted to see her daughter grow up and be there for her and encourage her and, encourage her to run in pageants just like she did.
Valentina Blackhorse may have contracted the virus while caring for her partner, Robbie Jones, a detention officer for the Navajo Department of Corrections, who says he could have been exposed at work. Valentina died on April 23rd, just one day after her coronavirus test came back positive. Well, for more, we're joined now by Robbie Jones. Robbie, to begin with, our deepest condolences for the loss of your partner, Valentina.
Thank you. Thank you about that.
I know you are just still reeling for you and your daughter, your family, your whole community. Can you tell us a little about Valentina?
Valentina, you can say she really loved her immediate family, her parents, her sisters, her nieces and nephews. She loved her elderly. She loved children. She was a kind and hardworking lady, and she was warm-hearted. One thing she would do anything for her immediate family. She always tried to take care of them as much as she could.
And Robbie, could you talk a little bit about her involvement in the community, the issues and the concerns that she had about the Navajo community?
Okay, for that, she was barely getting into that. She always wanted to help out the community. Where she worked at was Department of Community Development, where she was beginning to learning how the Navajo Nation would work and how the chapter houses in each part of the Navajo Nation, how they would provide for the community. So she was slowly learning how to be involved in that type of work. So she was slowly getting there. So she was just an office specialist, but then at that time she was learning a lot, and she really wanted to put herself in the community. I'm pretty sure if she was still here, she would have applied for a different job, but then she would exceed into something more that would help her community. But then I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and when she became ill, could you talk a little bit about the experience that she had there in terms, because obviously she died quickly after being testing positive, within a day of being tested positive. You talk about her experience from the time she got ill to the time she sought treatment.
Okay. When she first got sick, it was basically a week. She started showing symptoms of being shortness of breath, body aches, loss of taste and smell. During that time, when she was taking care of me, I guess she contracted it. So a little week over, that's when I started feeling better, and that's when she started feeling sick. And I took advantage of me recovering to take care of her. Her parents and I advised her to go to the clinic, but then she was afraid to go to the clinic. She didn't want to get admitted. So one day she just felt horrible. She wasn't feeling too good. So probably the first day she got sick, 4 days after, that's when I took her to our nearest clinic, and that's when they tested her. And then the next 4 days later, that's when she was tested positive for the COVID-19.
She was brought to the Kayenta Clinic, is that right, Robbie? And they had hoped to bring her to the hospital in Flagstaff, but she passed away before in the clinic?
Yes.
And Robbie, do you think you contracted coronavirus, the coronavirus, from your work in the detention center? Where do you work?
I believe so. I believed one of my coworkers, he tested positive for COVID-19. At that time, we didn't know that he went to get tested again, and this time it came out positive. So a few days later, that's when we were notified that he was tested positive for the virus.
And your daughter, Poet, has she been obviously informed of what happened with her mother? Have you been able to be with her at all, or are you still self-isolating?
I haven't been with her close to a month, because when I first found out that I had COVID-19, I told Valentina to drop off our baby with her parents' house. So it's been almost a month I haven't seen our daughter, and our daughter's only 1 year old. I haven't actually spoke with her yet.
Were you given the proper equipment, protective gear, Robbie, at work?
During that time, the only thing that we didn't have were masks. That was it. It was during that time where the whole United States had a huge shortage on the protection gear. So we had gloves, we had cleaning supplies to clean around the area, but the only thing is we were vulnerable to was I guess when people cough, so we didn't have masks at all.
Robbie, Valentina was trying to promote COVID awareness in the Navajo Nation. Among the many things she did about promoting Navajo culture, since you are a hot spot in the United States, one of the worst affected per capita, the Navajo Nation.
Yes. Especially with her immediate family, she would always tell us to wear a mask, wear our gloves, make sure to disinfect everything, because she was pretty afraid. Even before the Navajo Nation got hit hard, she was pretty aware, and she just wanted her family to be safe.
And how would you like the world and the community to remember Valentina?
I would say she was a kind-hearted person. She would put others before herself. If she knew someone needed help, she would help them. I know that she loved her elders and she loved her children, or the children in general, especially the people who are in need.
Robbie, we want to thank you so much for being with us. Robbie Jones, Valentina Blackhorse's partner. Again, our deepest condolences. Robbie Jones speaking to us from the Navajo Nation, where he is a detention officer. When we come back, we're going to speak with two doctors who've been working on the reservation, the largest in the country, the most significant hotspot in this country, per capita, third in the United States with coronavirus infection after New York and New Jersey. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back with them in a moment.
Shike, 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 shitene betrako shike, neo, awed nishli gotatia, ha'e'apia dentatia, yolke shitsi betlo gotatia, neo, shike, 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 shitene betrako shike, neo, ina atkin bikako yeshal, shabik eko bikako yeshal, shike, 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 shitene betrako shike. A
Woman's Journey by Red Melakoti. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, the epicenter of the pandemic. Juan Gonzalez is in New Jersey. It's number 2 for coronavirus infections. And now we're going to number 3 per capita Navajo Nation as we continue to look at how the Navajo Nation has been so hard hit by the coronavirus pandemic, highest number of coronavirus infections per capita in the United States following New York and New Jersey. The rural community has reported having nearly 2,300 known cases of COVID-19, 73 deaths as of Sunday. The Navajo Nation is the largest indigenous reservation in the United States with a population of some 350,000, a territory that spreads over 27,000 square miles. As we turn now to two doctors who know this land well, on the ground treating patients. Joining us from Gallup, New Mexico, Dr. Sriram Shamasundar is a leading medical volunteer. He's leading a medical volunteer group of 21 nurses and doctors from University of California, San Francisco, where he's an associate professor of medicine, to the Native American reservation near Gallup. He's the co-founder of the HEAL Initiative, which has worked across 9 countries, including Navajo nations, since 2015, promoting health equity. And joining us from Winslow, Arizona, Dr. Michelle Tom, member of the Navajo Nation, family physician treating COVID-19 patients at the Winslow Indian Health Care Center and Little Colorado Medical Center in northern Arizona, near the Navajo Reservation. She was a basketball star in college at Arizona State University. We welcome you both, doctors, to Democracy Now! Dr. Tom, let's begin with you. You work in the clinic where you were born. As you listen to Valentina's story, a 28-year-old Navajo woman who suddenly died after being diagnosed with COVID-19, your response, can you put it in the context of what's happening right now in the Navajo Nation?
It just kind of is a reflection of what we're going through as a people. And it correlates with what this virus can do to our young. As someone who was very motivated, loved our culture, spread our culture, are rich and strong in our language. And that's what we're trying to fight for. You know, there's not many who really promote really great things, who's a young person, and she was one of them. And she was going to lead our next generation. And so it was a hard loss for our community.
And Dr. Tom, why do you think there has been such a devastation in terms of COVID-19 throughout the Native population, especially in Navajo country?
I think the spread, we're a very matriarchal society, and we have a connection to the land and to our community. And so we really concentrate on the community. And when someone is sick, we tend to be there for one another, and we live in multi-generational homes. So the contact of that and the spread is obviously more than we wanted, but that was just part of our culture, is to help one another and to visit one another and encourage one another. So, and being with a very strong family and all these strong ties, that was probably, it's multifactorial, but that was one of the reasons.
And what about the external conditions confronted day to day? For instance, as much as 40% of people in the Navajo reservation do not have running water. How that affects their ability to combat this disease?
Oh, absolutely. And that's from a long state of histories with treaties and our relationship with the government. We've had set aside for certain things like that. And our infrastructure for water has never been at the capacity where we can provide water for everyone on the reservation. So you're telling people to wash their hands for 20 seconds, and yet people are trying just to get water, just to drink and just to cook with, and we know that water is part of a healthy body, so when you're trying to have people wash things all the time, we are struggling with just clean water in general.
I want to bring Dr. Sriram Shamasundar into the conversation. You're leading this group of volunteer doctors and nurses from San Francisco to Navajo Nation. You're in Gallup, that is put under lockdown right now by the governor because of this massive outbreak. You've described treating 4 generations of one family. Talk about your work that you've been doing there for years.
Yes, so I helped co-found HEAL Initiative, which is a global health immersive fellowship that trains and transforms frontline health professionals to make serving the underserved a lifelong choice. And so over the last 5 years, we've had 150 frontline health professionals come through our program, and half of them are U.S. doctors or nurses, and the other half are either Navajo or from countries such as Haiti or Mexico or Malawi or India. And so it's this really diverse community of frontline workers that are trying to get better at serving underserved populations. And we've worked in Navajo Nation for the last 5 years, since 2015, and had partnerships. And I think it's important to know that before COVID-19, Indian Health Service, Navajo population, what we're seeing now is, this trajectory of an underfunded health system where IHS is funded 1/3 the rate per capita as the VA or Medicare. And, the level of inequity that you're seeing and the COVID cases that you're seeing in Gallup as well as Chinle, it's part of this pattern. In Michigan and Chicago, we know that in Michigan, 14% of the population are Black folks, and yet 40% of the deaths are Black people. And in Navajo Nation and in New Mexico, 11% of the population is Native American, but you see almost 1/3 of the cases, COVID cases, being Native American. And I think I've been practicing both in Gallup, New Mexico, with our team of volunteers, as well as Chinle, Arizona. And Gallup, I think what's amazing is that I'm running a sprint, but my colleagues like Dr. Tom have really been running this marathon for a long period of time. And so in Gallup, they've done an amazing job. I think you've seen this incredible local leadership where they've been able to put 125 unsheltered people, community members, into motel rooms and have a collaboration to take care of them as well as stop community spread. And in Chinle, Arizona, this last weekend, I was taking care of patients. And like you mentioned, Amy, there's been 4 generations, a great-grandmother, a grandmother, a mother and daughter that were all hospitalized. And I think that this is what my Navajo colleagues have been dealing with for the last 6 weeks and the surge is upon us where, taking care of a grandmother this last weekend, we're always deciding whether these facilities can manage. And it's such a humbling disease because a lot of the facilities that we're in, once you intubate the patient, you have to transfer them to Phoenix or Albuquerque. And so all the providers are trying to learn what is the trajectory because every time you intubate a patient, it's just one more level beyond what we deal with in San Francisco because the Navajo people, where the land is so sacred, they are going to wake up isolated in another city such as, Phoenix or Albuquerque. And I think that is humbling. So the Navajo providers are trying to see how much can they take care of their patients in their facilities and when is it not safe anymore and they're going to have to transfer patients out.
And Dr. Shamasunder, I wanted to ask you about the extraordinary mobilization of the tribal authorities to combat COVID-19, and also how the government of New Mexico, the state government, has responded. Obviously, there was a lot of reports about the state invoking the Riot Control Act and sealing off Gallup. You talk about both the state response and the tribal government response, especially in view of what we've been seeing of the relative inaction at the federal level on this disease.
Yeah, I think that the incredible resourcefulness and resilience of the Navajo people is totally apparent when we come here. We actually met with President Nez, the Navajo president, when we arrived, and he's really been on the forefront of having people shelter in place and really, like Dr. Tom was saying, when you're trying to shelter in place and you live with 8 or 10 people and this expansive definition of family where the community is so connected, you're going to have community spread. And so the outbreak, I think, in Navajo Nation is not a lack of leadership. I think President Nez has been incredible at having these weekend lockdowns, which is extremely difficult for the Navajo people, and is really leading with wearing masks in public. And so doing all the right things, I think, from the national sovereign level. And he's been very vocal to say that the federal response has been extremely slow. And that's what I've seen in Chinle, Arizona. We have HEAL fellows that are behavioral health coaches that are usually not taking care of COVID patients at this time. So they've taken over the cafeteria and are making PPE and sewing PPE. And so the whole cafeteria has folks sewing PPE. So I think you see from the top of Navajo leadership to the citizens and health professionals really leading an incredible response. And the federal government has just been incredibly slow. And then obviously Gallup is a border town, which is not under jurisdiction of the Navajo government, but it is a area where a lot of Navajo people come to get groceries, come into town, and there's a lot of activity. And it's, the second highest caseload of new cases in the country in the last 2 weeks. And, I'm here, I'm going to go on shift later today. And the Gallup providers have just said, earlier last week, they said, I don't think we need you. And this week they're saying, we're getting exhausted. The surge is just coming and coming, and there's more and more patients, and we need you to help out and do some shifts. So, and I think the New Mexican government has been strong and really, almost following the lead that the Navajo president has put in place.
And finally, Dr. Michelle Tom, we have 30 seconds. What you feel the rest of the country should understand, especially with compromised health care in general in the area, due to poverty, due to uranium mining and how that compromises the health of so many people?
Yes, it's just access, just funding, and it's kind of made our work harder. But like, Dr. Shree said, we're coming together as a community. I'm proud of our nation. I'm proud of the facilities I work for. And just getting the public health notice out there of just washing your hands, social distancing, maybe hand sanitizer, and really just listening to our leaders right now and healthcare professionals.
We want to thank you so much, Dr. Michelle Tam, speaking to us from Winslow, Arizona, Navajo Nation family physician, one of the few Navajo doctors on the reservation, and Dr. Sriram Shamasundar, Associate Professor of Medicine, University of California, San Francisco, has led a group of doctors and nurses to Navajo Nation, has been doing that since 2015, and in Gallup, New Mexico right now, which is under lockdown. When we come back, the pandemic in prisons. We go to one prison in Ohio where 80% of the prisoners have tested positive. Half the staff will go to Marion. And we'll talk about prison abolition. Stay with us.
My daddy was a miner. My daddy's daddy too. Union Garden Country was all they ever knew. They worked from early morning till the evening whistle blew. When they strike the mine, they'd walk the line, 'cause that's just what you do. When you're born in West Virginia, a miner through and through. Union Garden Country was all you ever knew. Union Garden Country, West Virginia, gold and blue. Union Garden Country was all we ever knew. Before there was a union, the company was king. Work your fingers to the bone, couldn't show a thing. You shipped a coal to Friday, do your pay and then you'd walk down to the company store and get it back again. That's why they made the union, they had nothing left to lose. Union Garden Country was all they ever knew. It was Union Garden Country, West Virginia, gold and blue. Union Garden Country was all we ever knew.
of Steve Earle's new song, Union, God, and Country, from his latest album, Ghosts of West Virginia. That'll be released May 22nd and centers on the Upper Big Branch coal mine explosion that killed 29 men in that state in 2010, making it one of the worst mining disasters in American history. Steve Earle says, quote, West Virginia was the most unionized place in America until very recently. Upper Big Branch was the first non-union mine on that mountain, and it blew up and killed 29 men. This is a song about better days, he said. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we turn now to a prison in Ohio where one of the worst coronavirus outbreaks in the U.S. has killed at least 11 prisoners and one staff member. 80% of the prisoners, half the prison staff at Marion Correctional Institution, tested positive for COVID-19 in April, making it the largest virus hotspot in the country. A massive outbreak has also devastated Pickaway Prison, where at least 23 prisoners and one staff member have died from the virus. This is an incarcerated person at Marion describing conditions inside the prison.
I'm at Marion Correctional, where the coronavirus is just spreading like wildfire. Out of 2,500 people, they say 1,300 people got it. You know, that's a scary thought. I might not make it home to my children, you know. I just wanted to speak up for what I believe in, and hopefully that this will make a difference and it reaches the right hands and, you know, we get some kind of relief. All I can ask is just keep us in your prayers.
Despite growing calls to release thousands of Ohio's nearly 50,000 prisoners as the coronavirus spreads, Governor Mike DeWine has only approved the release of more than 100 people in the state's prisons. Protesters recently held a car demonstration outside the Ohio State House demanding the governor free 20,000 people in May. Demonstrators spoke to ABC News. This clip begins with Teresa Rogers, whose son is imprisoned in Ohio.
I think it's an unreasonable number, but most of them are going to get out anyway. Most of them are on their way out anyway.
How are we protecting these people? They don't have proper PPEs. Some of them have masks that are made from toilet paper and sheets.
This comes as a new report by the Prison Policy Initiative finds that while some jails have drastically cut populations, state prisons have released almost no one. Well, for more, we go to Austin, Texas, where we're joined by Azura Crispino, co-founder of Prison Abolition Prisoner Support, or PAPS, associate professor of philosophy at Austin Community College in Texas. Her husband, James, is incarcerated at Marion. Welcome to Democracy Now! Can you tell us, Azura, about the situation at Marion? I mean, this is 80% of the prisoners and half the staff. What are you demanding? How is your husband? You're asking that he be released. He has served the vast majority of his time. What is the response?
So far, we have received a response from the county prosecutor's office filing a motion against his judicial release, and we are waiting for Judge Wanda Jones to decide whether she will grant him a hearing or if she will deny his judicial release. We're seeing a few people being released out of Marion through the judicial release process. They are able to attend hearings by teleconference if they wish, but not anywhere near the 20,000 in May that we and others in our coalition are demanding. In terms of conditions at Marion, Governor DeWine has been bragging about the fact that he called in the National Guard. However, that has substantially increased tensions as you have people who are not trained in de-escalation and really don't understand the prison environment. You have incarcerated people who are taking care of each other as they are scared to request medical facilities because they are led to believe, and probably are, being placed in solitary confinement conditions if they are seen as being too sick, and then they won't be able to help each other. So we're getting reports of people using Vicks Vapor Rub and putting it in hot pots to basically create steamers for their fellow incarcerated people. Meanwhile, the governor is bragging about how great a resolution to this situation Ohio has.
And Azura Crispino, this is not just an Ohio problem. Obviously, we're getting the reports. We've seen reports that in Cook County Jail in Chicago, 800 confirmed cases of the virus. And so far, 6 prisoners and 1 correction officer have died. We're seeing in New York City at Rikers Island, 800 city correction employees have tested positive, and 8 have died. The city jails seem to be moving much more quickly to reduce prison populations, but some of the state prison systems are much more slower to react or resisting.
Absolutely.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that it's a political problem, right? The governors don't want to be seen as being soft on crime, and politically they have absolutely nothing to lose. Whereas those of us who have family and friends who are incarcerated understand that these are loved ones and we don't want to see them die. In addition, I don't think that there's been enough focus on the judiciary and how it can be involved. Now, Ohio is a little unique because it has a completely different parole system than most states. Long short, it almost got rid of parole in 97. So what that means is that it's easier for political officials to basically be able to pass the hot potato around, I think, in state facilities in a way that we have not seen at the federal level or at the city and county jails, where due to the pretrial nature of many people, I think there's been a greater focus on helping people who are presumed innocent. So I think ultimately this is a question of humanization. As long as we continue to see incarcerated people as disposable, then we're not going to deal with this problem head on.
I want to bring in another guest into this conversation as we turn now to look at the coronavirus and the case for abolition. The spread of COVID-19 poses mortal danger to the more than 2.3 million people locked up in U.S. prisons and jails. As of May 1st, the Marshall Project reports more than 14,000 incarcerated people and nearly 4,000 workers in state and federal prisons have tested positive for the virus, and that number is expected to be far higher due to lack of testing. Activists and human rights defenders are demanding the mass release of prisoners to save lives and halt the spread of this deadly virus. For more, we're joined by abolitionist scholar Ruth Wilson Gilmore, professor of Earth and Environmental Sciences and director of the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics at CUNY Graduate Center. She is co-founder of California Prison Moratorium Project and Critical Resistance and author of Golden Gulag, Prison, Surplus, Crisis, and Opposition in Globalizing California. Her forthcoming book is Change Everything, Racial Capitalism and the Case for Abolition. Professor Ruth Wilson Gilmore, it's an honor to have you with us from Lisbon, Portugal, where you are right now. Can you start off with the basics? How would you define abolition? And can you put it in a pandemic context right now?
Oh, I certainly. Thank you for having me on the show. And it was very good for me to hear the commentary from my colleague in Texas. Abolition seeks to undo the way of thinking and doing things that sees prison and punishment as solutions for all kinds of social, economic, political, behavioral, and interpersonal problems. Abolition, though, is not simply decarceration, put everybody out on the street. It is reorganizing how we live our lives together in the world. And this is something that people are doing in a variety of ways throughout the United States and around the planet already. It is not a pie-in-the-sky dream. It is actually something that is practical and achievable in the city of New York, in Texas, in South Africa, around the world.
Well, could you talk about this response from in other parts of the world to the question of crime and punishment, and why? Obviously, we often talk about how the United States has such a disproportionate percentage of the world's prison population.
Yes, it's kind of interesting, although it's probably just a coincidence, that the United States has about 1 in 4 prisoners in the world. It also has about 1 in 4 COVID deaths in the world. And although that might just be a coincidence, it does make me stop and think about how it is that we organize ourselves in the United States across the disparate and various polities that go from the Atlantic to the Pacific and beyond. So in other parts of the world, what one sees is a very simple fact. Where life is precious, life is precious. In places where the state, the government, municipalities, social justice organizations, faith communities, labor unions work together to lift up human life, the incidence of crime and punishment, including the incidence of interpersonal harm, are less likely to occur. And this is in places where populations are every bit as diverse as in the United States. We also see that in places where inequality is the deepest, the use of prison and punishment is the greatest. Nowhere, however, gets even close to the United States.
Professor Ruth Wilson Gilmore, you talk about organized abandonment and organized violence of the state. You talk about this as twin evils of the pandemic. Please explain.
Okay, did I use the word evil? I might well have done. There are twin aspects of the pandemic, and that is to say that organized abandonment has to do with the way that people, households, communities, neighborhoods do not have equal levels of support and protection against the pandemic, and that the response to people trying to figure out how to shelter themselves and save themselves, let's take an example from the city of New York, homeless people living in the subways, is to use policing and criminalization, i.e. punishment, to resolve the problems of abandonment. Now, organized abandonment is not only abandonment by the state, it's also abandonment by capital. Whether it's abandonment by real estate capital that produces more and more luxury apartments, but not affordable housing, as we can see in struggles throughout the city of New York and around the United States, or tourism capital that pushes certain kinds of people out of certain areas of the city and only welcomes them in if they work as workers in the service industry, delivering, serving, taking care of, and cleaning. There are many, many ways for us to think about organized abandonment, but that thinking should bring us to consider both how capital, large and small, and state, municipal or greater, work together to raise barriers to some kinds of people and lower them for others.
I wanted to ask you, when prison reform is discussed, it's usually talked about help or assistance to nonviolent offenders or release of nonviolent offenders as opposed to violent offenders, as if a violent offender, there's no question that they can never be released before their sentence is up. Your take on this issue of the attempt to divide the prison population between nonviolent and violent offenders?
Certainly, and my colleague from Texas already raised this in her discussion with you. The assumption underlying that division suggests that we know something about one group of people that is never, ever going to change. And what we forget is most people who go to prison for whatever the controlling offense, which is to say what they're convicted of, leave someday. That means that instead of thinking that we have these two groups that we can predict the behavior of, that we ought to be thinking about the kind of life that makes possible people to return to the world from which they've been removed in such a way that any harm that might have occurred does not harm anybody again in the future. What abolitionists do in all kinds of work surrounding what we call transformative justice is to try to work that out. So some of the leading abolitionists in the United States and around the world today are people like Mariame Kaba and Andrea Smith and Kelly Gillespie and others who came out of work against domestic violence, i.e., it was in doing work to try to fight against violence and harm that they realized abolition was the only way to resolve the problems that were not being resolved by having better, faster, more swift and sure punishment when somebody harmed somebody else.
I wanted to bring Azura back into the conversation to ask about the media coverage of the prisoners, again, and get Ruth Wilson Gilmore's response to this astounding situation in Ohio. 80% of the prisoners testing positive. You have that happening right now in Ohio. In, in Tennessee, you have... in Arkansas, Governor Asa Hutchinson announced Tuesday nearly 40% of the state's coronavirus cases are concentrated at Cummins Maximum Security Prison, where some 850 prisoners have tested positive. In New York, the former head of the jail's doctor is accusing MDC, Metropolitan Detention Center, of not releasing figures on the prisoners who are detained there. So what is your exact demand right now as your husband remains in prison, and the response of the governor of Ohio, DeWine?
Sure. First of all, I just wanted to thank Professor Wilson Gilmore, because my husband has been convicted of a violent offense. That doesn't mean that he's a violent person. And people absolutely can change. I think in terms of the media coverage, one of the frustrations has been that Ohio DRC has been unwilling to release the names of the dead, especially at Pickaway. We have one of our coalition partners who's formerly incarcerated there who really wants to know which of his friends may have died, but we are being told that we can't have that information due to privacy reasons. Yet at Marion Correctional, when recently two well-known people who had committed murders died, both of them got media coverage in their deaths. But when Jesse Ziegler dies, right, a beloved father, then we don't talk about him, right? So from the use of the word inmate versus incarcerated person, the focus on state actors such as Governor DeWine without focusing on what everybody else can do, we've seen, I think, some pretty mixed media coverage, and I would like to see journalists continue to do better by reaching out to people who are directly impacted and uplifting those voices. I think the people who are closest to the problem are always closest to the solution, and it's so wonderful to see journalists such as Democracy Now! Doing a great job of covering these issues.
And Professor Wilson Gilmore, we have about a minute left, but I wanted to ask you, you focused a lot of your research and attention on the role of incarceration in California specifically, the nation's biggest and most populous and prosperous state. Could you talk about that as well, the lessons from California?
Certainly. I think the major lesson I would like to share with our audience these last few seconds that we have together is that California was on a path to making what was a huge and bulging prison system to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's where the contemporary abolition movement in the United States took root. And we fought and fought and fought throughout urban and rural California, making common cause with labor unions, healthcare workers, faith communities, environmental justice activists, and other to denaturalize the notion that crime was the problem for which prison and punishment was the right solution. As a result of which, the number of people in California prisons is much lower than it was even imagined it could be in the year 2000 because of the work that abolitionists did. That work needs to expand, but we see victories in Los Angeles County where a plan to build multi-billion-dollar jails was defeated after nearly 15 years of struggle.
Ruth Wilson Gilmore, we have to leave it there, but I want to thank you so much for joining us from Lisbon, Portugal, author of Golden Gulag, Prison Surplus, Crisis and Opposition in Globalizing California, her forthcoming book, Change Everything, Racial Capitalism and the Case for Abolition. And I want to thank Azura Crispino, co-founder of Prison Abolition, Prisoner Support. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Stay safe.